This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by iZotope, Native Instruments, SAE Institute, Atom Audio, Spectra 1964, and Picker. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now recorded through a Spectra 1964 STX 100 mic pre and mixed with iZotope, Ozone, and RX on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Grab my free mixing course at Mixmaster Bundle with the link in the show notes below. And please make sure to visit our fantastic sponsors also in the show notes and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock. What are some of your favorite ways to record acoustics and mandolins? And tell us about that session if you want.
That was a really fun group to work with. So acoustic guitar, broadly speaking, two approaches that I might take to acoustic guitar. I might mic it in mono or I might mic it in stereo. And it might depend upon the arrangement of the song. So in a situation where acoustic guitar is going to be like the main instrument, like maybe it's a singer-songwriter kind of thing, there's an acoustic guitar and a voice and maybe a few other things, then I want the acoustic guitar to take up more space in the mix, and I'm probably going to mic it in stereo. And versus if I have an acoustic guitar that's just part of a rock track that has a bunch of stuff going on, I probably don't necessarily want to take up a lot of real estate in the mix with it, and maybe I'll just mic it in stereo and I'm going to pan it off to one side somewhere or something like that.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Rockstars, if you want the ultimate toolkit for your music, check out Complete 15 from Native Instruments. With 165 instruments and over 150,000 sounds to choose from, it is the most powerful creative tool in your studio. From Contact 8 to Massive X, Battery, and Guitar Rig 7 Pro, you've got everything you need to create in any genre. Pair that with Native Instruments control keyboards and machine hardware, and you get next-level integration that makes music creation fun, fast, and seamless. Head on over to nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 for 10% off. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is David Streit, a recording engineer, producer, mixer, and live sound engineer based in Portland, Oregon. With over 35 years of experience, he started mixing live shows in his hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, before refining his recording skills in Nashville. He later freelanced in Nashville and Santa Cruz before settling in the Pacific Northwest. David holds a recording degree from Middle Tennessee State University and interned at the Aspen Music Festival, learning classical miking techniques. His career spans assisting at Quad Studios here in Nashville, teaching multi-track recording, and working in location sound. And a big thank you to Middle Tennessee State University for making our original introduction many, many years ago when we were both students there. Please welcome David Streit to Recording Studio Rockstars. We've been trying to do this for a long time, actually. David, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I'm so ready to rock, Lidge, and it's great to finally be here with you on the podcast. So thank you.
Thanks, man. Welcome to the show, dude. I know you were here visiting not too long ago, and we had a good hang and chat and stuff like that. But we did try and schedule this the first time, and I think we had to reschedule. So I appreciate you coming back.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I know you all the way back from school, so that doesn't really count. I mean, we were hanging out at shows, watching local bands playing together. But give us a bit of a story arc to you and like the brief version where it's like, how'd you get interested in music? Why do you do this? And how'd you end up all the way out in Portland where you've been, had a long and fruitful recording career?
Yeah, right on. Far. Cool. Yeah, so I mean, I've always loved music as long as I can remember. Young with my dad's stereo system and listening to records and all that kind of thing. And I wasn't really a musician. I don't know. I played in a school band and I sang in choir in high school. I did some stuff like that. But, I think a lot of engineers and producers come into this from like they start as a musician, maybe they're in a band, and then somebody has to record the band, so they get interested. That kind of story happens a lot. I came into it really I started in live sound. So in college, I got into student activities there at the University of Louisville at first, and got into live sound and loved music, and like that was an intersection, but was interested in technology and that kind of stuff. So that and wasn't as interested in being a performer, but I really liked being behind the scenes and that aspect of it. So it was all great.
Yeah, Louisville's a great music scene. I mean, I was coming out of St. Louis, and that was one of our favorite places to go play.
Yeah. I'm actually pretty sure I saw your band at Tooligans before we actually met.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure. I know I saw your band somewhere, and I bet it was Tooligans. So yeah. So got into that. And so I was always an engineer before I was a musician. I mean, I play too. I'm not in any bands or anything like that, but I was always an engineer first, and that was my primary focus the whole time. So yeah, I was doing live sound and really got into that for a few years, and then got interested in recording as well. And it wasn't like it is today. There weren't that many recording schools or programs around the country. Mm-hmm. So I started doing some research, thinking maybe I should do that, and found out about MTSU, Middle Tennessee State University, where Lidge and I both went to school. That was implied earlier, but we both went to school there. Transferred down to Middle Tennessee State and started really getting into recording, and that became my emphasis. Once I graduated, I hung around Nashville, including school. I was around Nashville for about 12 years. So
let me ask you a question. When you were at MTSU, you talked about being an engineer first and foremost, or
yeah,
100%. I can think of somebody else who told me that at MTSU, but I'm curious. Jamie Tate said the same thing.
Another classmate of ours, another contemporary.
Yeah, exactly. But did you find that, maybe Efri Shippen too, I'm not sure. But do you think of knowing lots of people who are similar, like came in just from the engineering?
I don't.
I mean, you said earlier it's mostly musicians.
Yeah, I don't.
I guess.
And maybe that's, like I listen to your podcast and I listen to some other podcasts and stuff. And so I hear all kinds of origin stories, and most of them that I hear in these situations are like, yeah, I was in a band and da-da-da.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what I think of it. And maybe a lot of the people we went to school with were engineers first. I'm not sure. I'm sure Jamie.
Well, I think it's cool that we can come at this from, all kinds of different directions too.
So, yeah.
Okay, cool. So you did that. You were doing interning, and you're at Quad here in Nashville.
Yeah. So I did a couple internships while I was in school, which was fantastic, by the way. That was such a fantastic learning experience. What an opportunity to be able to do that in Nashville with all the amazing engineering talent there, getting to look over people's shoulders. That was really formative. And then graduated from Middle Tennessee State and immediately went freelance, which I think my friend John Yash once said, you know what freelance means? It means I'm unemployed.
The Yash man. Yeah, right.
Yeah. He was an engineer that I used to get to assist with and things like that.
Well, the cool thing about freelance, actually, to that topic too, is I came to that conclusion at one point. Do you remember feeling like with freelance, it's like you were stressing about in between the gigs, and then maybe later, well, I crossed a bridge later where I was like, why am I always stressing about it? I'm like, I've already done this for a long time,
Yeah.
And if I look back, I made it here, even though I was stressing about whether I had a gig.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. So. And I eventually came to that too. I never got too stressed about it, at least that I can remember. I was always able to kind of go with the flow, but I certainly worried about it. Something when you're starting out and there's nothing on the calendar, you definitely start thinking about, what am I doing here? For sure.
True.
But I think something I definitely found from talking to other people over time is certain people feel comfortable enough hanging with that sort of uncertainty and the up and down and the feast and famine. And for other people, it's not the right situation for them, and they need a more steady job. And however you are, what's comfortable to you, and that makes sense, But I was always good with it.
Yeah.
So freelance for a little bit, looking for more of a steady gig, and eventually got on at Quad Studios, and I was a second engineer and a house engineer there.
Right on.
And that was great.
Tell us a little bit about Quad, because that's an amazing story.
Yeah. It was originally started by, I think, David Briggs and Norman Putnam or somebody in the 70s. And it's funny, It was called, so Quad had 4 studios. It was a studio complex with 4 studios. But when it was started, it was named Quad after quadraphonic sound, which was a thing in the 70s at that point in time. So they didn't actually have 4 rooms at first, but it was still Quad. But when I got there was 4 rooms. It was amazing. There was in one room, there's a Trident A-range console, and then we had a Neve 8068 and a Sphere Eclipse in the 3rd room. And then the 4th room was like a TAC console. It's the budget room, whatever. But it was amazing, and all kinds of interesting projects and people passed through there. And so I got to meet a lot of people and work with a lot of really cool engineers. And then it was also nice that it was a large enough sort of situation with 4 studios that there were several of us on staff. And so there was that really great sort of peer group where you could, sometimes when there was downtime, we'd some of the staff engineers, we'd hang out and we'd mic something up, or we'd experiment with something, or we'd play each other our projects and, hey, what do you think? Or, come hang out on my session. And so to have that kind of peer group, I'm still friends with a few people that I know from that time, and it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super cool. And, that ability to just hang out with peers. I mean, to me, that was a big part of going to college, going to MTSU.
Absolutely, 100%.
And there's multiple programs. Here in Nashville, there's also Belmont University. There's SAE Institute, which is fantastic, right down on Music Row. But like any of those where you just are hanging out with other people who care about the same thing you do.
Yeah, especially when you're learning. I kind of miss that now. So maybe not just when you're learning, anytime.
I think a lot of people miss it or don't, never got to experience it necessarily. But the another cool thing about Quad Studios, that was a place that would have an in-house studio technician that was gear,
Dave Latto. Dave Latto was the dude.
Yeah, Dave Latto, he was great.
He was great. Right? And there were a couple other people who kind of came in and out and helped him out. But we had 3 vintage consoles, so he had his hands full, like just keeping things running and in good shape. And but he took care of the place, and we would help him a little bit.
So all 3 of those, I know we didn't, you 3. So the TAC, thank you, TAC. But we're going to talk about the Neve, the Trident.
Although it's an impressive, it's a TAC Magnum.
Oh, Magnum.
Yes.
Nice.
But
But so the consoles, I got to work on 2 of those, the Neve, and I actually did, it was very funny. I did transfers using the Sphere that were ADAT to Mitsubishi 32 track to go mix a project once. How kooky was that?
ADATs were the bane of our existence, because we'd always had, when they started coming in and being popular, we'd have clients who would bring in ADAT tapes, and we'd need to sync them up to one of our other multi-track formats and transfer, and the syncing was always,
Is that why I was in the Sphere room doing the transfers? Because you guys sort of were always doing transfers over in that room or something?
I don't know. Those ADATs were on like a cart, and they could be wheeled around, so we used them in different rooms. You were probably in the Sphere room because it was the smallest of those rooms, and you didn't need a big tracking space to do some transfers.
I recently saw another Sphere console here in Nashville.
Yeah.
The old King Biscuit Flower Hour mobile studio that used to be behind Douglas Corner. I was there. I was at their new location, and they've still got it. It's out in the country.
So it was mobile, like was it installed in a van or something like that, or?
It was a tractor trailer for a truck.
Awesome.
It was in the back of a truck. You open the door and you go in, you're like, it's this long, skinny studio, and it just instantly smelled like the 1970s.
Nice.
That whole thing with the old stuff.
Yeah.
So great. Yeah.
There was
But anyway, I digress. And another thing that was cool about Quad, of course, was there were sort of winding echo chamber hallways underneath studio.
Yeah.
Was it B that had the Neve in it?
Yeah, although we call it, there wasn't like A, B, and C, which is funny because clients, especially like label clients would call and be like, we want, the ones that had a budget, they would just call and say, we want to book Studio A, because A is usually the biggest, most expensive studio. And we didn't have a Studio A. We didn't do that. We had the Trident room, the Neve room.
Right.
So, but under the Neve.
Because they were all great.
Yeah, they were all great. And it was kind of, those were kind of marquee consoles. Like that name meant something, So, but in the basement under studio, the Neve studio, there was some plates down there, and there was an echo chamber that was like this thing that was constructed. It was like a long sort of windy chamber that was built, and then like layers and layers of plaster to make it really hard and reflective on the inside.
Right.
I was reminded of that. Somebody was posting online on Facebook about the tornado. There was a tornado that came through, and it must have been 98 maybe, and we were all at the studio working, and like it was serious, so we ended up going down in the basement, and that was like our fallback. Like that echo chamber was solid. Like if it hits, we're going to jump in there because that's probably going to be the only thing left standing,
Yeah, I feel like that would be a great scene in one of these, all too common zombie TV show series is now,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going into the echo chamber or if they're coming out of the echo chamber, one of the two.
Yeah.
And then the room that we were in, actually, it was called, kept telling me that they were calling it like the Harvest Moon room or something, because I think Neil Young Harvest Moon was done.
The room that was the Neve room was the original quad room. It was in Harvest Moon. It was actually the Harvest record, because Harvest Moon it's almost the same name, but that was a more contemporary record that was done in like the East or something.
Okay, cool.
The Harvest record, which is classic Neil Young record, they did a fair amount of that at Quad and in that room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if I recall, that record has really unique sounds on it, like the way the instruments and everything sound. It's very like right up in your face in a cool way.
Yeah, it's a fantastic record, no doubt.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you didn't spend your whole life at Quad, so we can move on from there if you want.
So I did move on. So I spent about 1.5 years at Quad and then decided it was time to go freelance. And this is funny. I really was thinking about, when's going to be the right time. And so I'd gotten to the point where I'd met some people and had, some clients and made friends and contacts in the industry. And I had 4 separate clients lined up that were going to be like, yeah, if you go freelance, we're going to hire you. And, we'll give you some work.
Nice.
And so I figured, okay, this is a good basis, a good starting point. They weren't going to keep me 100% booked or anything, but that's going to be my anchor thing, and that'll give me enough stability to step out into the world. So I went freelance at the beginning of 1999, and I never worked a single day for any one of those 4 clients. It just never happened. Like, it just never happened. And they were cool and they liked me and everything, but it just never lined up for whatever. But there was like a little bit of a dip, and within a month I was working and making more money than I had being full-time at Quad, because the pay rate for a staff engineer wasn't that great. It was an awesome experience, and I wouldn't trade it. It was a great time, and I learned so much, and it was totally worth it, and I was into it. But I started making more money pretty quickly after I went freelance.
I remember the studio that I interned at. I think the assistant engineers were making like $10 an hour or something.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly.
I was so jealous of them because I was making $5 an hour, building cables at night or something like that.
Yeah.
So, like, what were some of the early freelance sessions you remember that really stood out to you? Or records that were really important?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember.
Too, the one that's making you laugh. We want to hear about that
one.
No,
I'm laughing because I'm like, I don't remember what I did.
Yeah, but you probably remember the stories of, like, the things that went well. How about the stories about, not everything's a success, so there's, failure moments along the way. Do you have anything that you remember that was a kind of a crash and burn that turned into a great learning experience for you?
Yes, I do. I had a big crash and burn. This was actually not right after I left Quad. This was a little bit later. So, when I was at Quad, and in those years, nobody was really using Pro Tools as a multi-track. Like, it was just starting to come in, but we were on tape machines, even if it was an ADAT or something like that. Maybe within a couple of years after I went freelance, Pro Tools started coming in and started becoming the multi-track. And, we're still doing a lot of sessions on tape, but Pro Tools was becoming a thing. And I decided, well, I need to learn how to use this, obviously. And I was doing a lot of freelance work for a studio down in Franklin, just south of Nashville, called Classic Recording. George Cumby was the owner, and he and I got along really well, and he put a Pro Tools rig in his small front room studio, and he was very kind to let me come in off hours when it wasn't being used and just spend a good amount of time there just with the manual, with the rig, and just messing around with it and getting to know it and learning how to use it. And
yeah, back when we were learning Pro Tools, you had to have this big 3-ring binder
that's
thing
right.
and carry it around with you. It's like a giant encyclopedia that you had to pour through.
Yes, exactly right. So I spent a good amount of time in there, like learning how to do stuff in the program and getting to know it and that kind of thing. So I could, work on that platform. And I got a session as an engineer at a studio, and it was on Pro Tools, and I felt totally confident because I'd spent all this time and I knew my way around the program and everything. And we got into the session, and things were sounding good and all that. And at some point, they were like, can you just fly this thing around and do this thing over here? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I started doing it, And I got a little lost, things got a little out of sync, and I basically came into a situation because I'd spent a lot of time on the rig, but I hadn't really done sessions on it because that just hadn't come up. This is kind of my first big session on the Pro Tools, and I came across a thing that I didn't even know that I didn't know how to do exactly, and there was a subtlety to it that I missed, and so it ended up basically just stalling the session. Like, they had all these musicians waiting for me to do this thing. And
right, which is tricky in Nashville too, because it's not like the band is waiting. This is like all these, they're hired musicians on sessions a lot of times. So the clock is ticking.
The clock is ticking and everybody's looking at you. And so basically I went down in flames on that session. And and we moved on and we got some stuff accomplished. And then after everybody left, I stayed for hours and figured out how to make it right, basically, and put things where they needed to be and got things back where they needed to be. But it was totally torpedoed the session.
Rock stars, are you ready to unlock the full potential of your mixes and masters? Then you need iZotope Ozone 12. This complete tool set gives you 20 pro modules, including the new bass control, unlimiter, and stem EQ, plus the IRC5 maximizer for loud, clean mixes and masters without distortion, including the new mastering assistant that guides, not decides, so you are always in control. Go to iZotope.com and use the code ROCK10 for 10% off. Was it a synchronization issue where things were not staying lined up or something?
It was, and this is a long time ago now, so I don't remember all of the details at this point.
Well, there's so many crazy things we would run into on sessions too. Like, I had one that crashed and burned, and I was actually out at the Castle, a great studio.
That was a cool place.
Well-known studio too. So, no fault of their own, really. This was just the nature of Pro Tools back then.
Yeah.
But we were doing a session, and the sessions, Pro Tools, they were corrupted, which I'm actually, it's so funny how you learn these things. So now, like, when Pro Tools starts acting weird, and I'm not necessarily picking on Pro Tools, it's just the one I'm always using.
Yeah.
I mean, this probably would be the same story in anything. But like, you learn, okay, if it's acting weird and I know it's not supposed to be doing this, or I'm pretty sure it's not supposed to be doing this, you just make a new session, you import all the tracks over, you trash the preferences, you do all these things. But like, how the hell would you know any of that? You only know those things because you learned them through all these crash and burns in the past.
100%. So 2 things I learned from that crash and burn. One is it's valuable. Like, the thing I did sitting there studying and learning the individual actions and how to do certain key commands, and that you need to do that. But to really be able to use a program in a session, you also have to use it in a session. In retrospect, what I've learned is probably what I should have done is maybe gotten a band to come in a lower pressure situation and just, actually done a session or 2 in Pro Tools before I hired myself out to do it in a high pressure situation.
Yeah, although I will say there is something to be said for, high pressure is a lot to jump into for the first time, but there's a lot to be said to have some amount of pressure.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it really does cause us to
you're absolutely right.
Step up to the plate.
And that would have been, because I was sitting alone in this room learning Pro Tools. To maybe have a band come in and actually do a real world scenario, that probably would have been enough of what you're talking about, like some actual pressure, some real world situation, things coming up, actually doing the thing in a real recording session and going through all the steps. That would have been valuable. And the other thing I learned is, and this was, I was still kind of early in my career as an engineer, and I was a freelancer. At some point when all this was going on and I was trying to fix it and everybody was waiting, one of the musicians sat down next to me and just said, "Hey man, why don't you let me jump in and fix this?" And I should have said, "Yeah, man, absolutely, thank you." But I felt like, well, I'm supposed to be the engineer, and at the time, and I'm supposed to know how to do this, and so I was just like, no, I've got it, and I didn't have it.
Right, and he was probably being gentle about it, but he probably knew how to do it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, 100%. I'm sure that's exactly what it was, and he wasn't sort of mean-spirited about it or anything. He was really nice about it, and I think sort of a combination of pride and maybe some embarrassment that I didn't know as much as I thought I knew.
Absolutely. Well, when you're sweating bullets and you're under stress, I mean, it's hard to have that kind of clarity of mind. So to that topic, though, Do you remember, was there a point at which you ever found yourself putting a microphone on a particular instrument and just realizing, I should ask this musician if they have a spot that has worked before?
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'll start there.
Absolutely. And I do that a lot. And that's something I learned pretty early on, thank goodness, because it's super valuable. Yeah, I do that all the time. Especially instruments I'm not that familiar with, things I haven't recorded that much before.
Yeah.
And sometimes also a musician will just volunteer, hey, this is the spot where it sounds good. And sometimes, a lot of times they're right. Like, you need to trust the musicians, but at the same time, sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's not the right spot, but you try it out and listen to it. And if it works, awesome. And if not, maybe you try something else.
Well, it's true. Sometimes with some musicians, they may be giving you a spot, but it might be more what worked on the stage than what worked in the studio.
Yeah, or what worked in
So it's good to know that difference.
Yeah.
But when Bella Fleck told me where to put the mic on the banjo, I was like, that is exactly where I'm putting the mic on the banjo.
Yeah, and thank you, Bella. Thank you very much. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So where'd you go after the freelance stuff? You ended up out on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Tell us about your teaching experience.
That was, I want to say that was 2003, something like that. I was still in Nashville, and it was MTSU called me up, and one of my professors from that I'd had at MTSU called me up, and I'm still friends with some of my professors, which is awesome. And there was some really,
Dan Pfeiffer's retired.
I know, and John Hill too. As a matter of fact, I had lunch with both of them a few years ago when I was visiting, and they're just great people, and I'm so happy that I'm still friends with them.
Yeah, no doubt. I was lucky to get Dan to come be on the podcast just before he retired.
I listened to that one at some point. Absolutely.
It was a lot of fun to chat with him.
Absolutely.
Even though he threw me under the bus for not turning a paper in. It's all right. I forgive you, Dan.
Yeah. But so anyway,
I didn't even remember it on.
They had a whole bunch of students and not quite enough people to teach the classes for the students to be able to get the classes they needed to get. So they were adding some additional sections of the recording class, multi-track recording class, and contacted me and asked me if I'd be interested in teaching it. I thought about it and said, yeah, that sounds fun. It sounds really cool. And they
2000.
It was around.
Tape
it was around then. We used. I'm pretty sure we had a digital tape machine that we used in that class. I don't think, this is a little fuzzy in my mind. It was definitely a tape machine, but I think it was...
Might not have been analog. Maybe I think it was a DA88 or something.
No, it was a reel-to-reel, open reel-to-reel, like a pro machine. I think it might have been a Mitsubishi, like 32-track PD format. It was either that or a 24-track Sony Dash format, but it was a reel-to-reel, open reel digital machine for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't think, it wasn't an analog machine, I don't think.
I remember when we were in school, of course, we had to take align the analog tape machine test in class.
I don't think we ever had to do that when I was going, I don't remember having to do that. Although,
well, it might have been a particular class.
Yeah, I remember doing it at some point. And I definitely did it a whole lot once I got to Quad Studios. I was aligning tape machines all the time. Yeah.
I know. What a cool experience. I'm so glad we got to do that stuff.
Me too.
Do you find yourself crossing paths with analog tape at all anymore?
No, yeah. I can't remember. The last time I did a session on analog was probably over a decade ago. And honestly, at this point, I don't miss it that much. Like, I'm very happy with working in Pro Tools, and I think there's a lot of advantages to it. And analog costs more because you got to buy some tape, and you have to have a well-maintained machine. And I don't miss aligning machines at this point. I do. I'm a little nostalgic. Like, if somebody came to me and like, we've got this budget, we want to work on analog, and I'd be like, great, let's do that. And I think it'd be fun just for nostalgia, I do miss.
Would you align the machine, or would you be like, just make sure the machine's aligned?
I think I might be. I would be like, let's just make sure the machine's aligned. But then I'd be like, but who's going to do it? Okay, maybe I should. Mm-hmm. Like, and if they had somebody who I knew how to do it, I'd be like, great, you do it. That's awesome.
Yeah. How long do you remember it taking to align an analog machine before a session?
So we had, at Quad, we had the Otari MTR 90, I think Mark IIIs. And so they had a group bias adjustments.
So you could bias multiple tracks at once or something?
Yes. So, and you had to check it. Like, you would check it and just make sure, you'd eyeball it and make sure all the needles were peaking at around the same point, and make sure, because you had to align the individual biases on the individual cards for each of the 24 tracks. They all had to be relatively at the same for the master bias thing to work. So I had that. And yeah, I could do a 24 track alignment in 45 minutes, which I felt was pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I used to do.
I think my MCI JH16, I used to carve out 2 hours before the day before the session to go in there and align it, and then.
But our machines were well maintained, and yeah, I used to do that a lot because we had 4 rooms going.
But it was kind of fun because there was something rewarding about getting the machine aligned, and it's an alignment. It's like you just tuned up the guitar.
Yeah,
really
absolutely,
well,
100%.
And now it's ready to rock.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So what next?
Where do
we go next?
Yeah,
so you ended up out in California or
taught
in
a first semester.
Santa Cruz, right?
They asked me to teach again, and I wanted to, but I was also missing out on sessions because I had to commit 2 days a week to be in the classroom teaching. So I didn't do that.
Right.
Someday I would like to teach again, but that's a whole other story. So I spent a couple more years in Nashville. I moved to Connecticut for about 1.5 years, and that's where I did a lot of sound for picture stuff. And I ended up, there just wasn't much of a music scene where I was in Connecticut.
There was one well-known studio. I forgot. It was us. Apples in Stereo did a record
really?
there.
You know, there is the power station in New York City.
Right.
That was an Avatar. There's an iconic tracking room there that's amazing. Somebody in Connecticut made a reproduction of that room, and there's a studio in I think New London or close to New London called Power Station New England.
Yes, I do know about that one.
Yeah,
beautiful space too.
It is beautiful. I actually have a friend who's on staff there right now, which is kind of cool. But shout out Trevor. So yeah, I'm sure there were some cool things going on in New Haven, but I wasn't living in New Haven at the time, sadly. Right. So anyway, short stint in Connecticut. Didn't do much music there, which is why I eventually left. But I did get some interesting experience doing some location sound for video shoot kind of stuff, among other things. Yeah.
What'd you learn about location sound for video shoot? How was that new and different? Like, what are some lessons that you were able to carry on from there? Do you use shotgun mics, for example?
So the standard, it varied by situation, but oftentimes you'd have a lav mic on the person that was often wireless if you were mobile, because a lot of times you're kind of in situations where people are walking around or whatever. And then you would have a shotgun mic on a pole. And so, operating the boom pole and like keeping it out of the shot, because audio in the video world, we know is very important and lends a sense of realism to picture or whatever. But in the video world, in the hierarchy of things, audio is pretty low in the totem pole. So one of the skills is just keeping the mic out of the camera shot. So you're often standing right behind the camera person, and you're kind of keeping an eye on them, and they might give you a subtle hand signal if you're encroaching on their shot. And also you just kind of, maybe there's a monitor you can look at or whatever. So that's part of the skill set, positioning the mic to try to reject noise sources but trying to get close enough to get good quality sound and and then just keeping an eye on the camera person, because maybe they're going to take off walking and you have to follow them, and if you're doing kind of a thing where it's people walking around or it's more mobile. Sometimes we did shots where it was more stationary, but
there's a new TV show out called Adolescence. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't seen it.
Recently? Well, it's a fascinating thing with 4 episodes in the show. I think it's shot in the UK, and it's a story about a boy who, there's a murder and there's a trial and all this stuff. And I was watching the first episode when I realized halfway through, I was like, holy shit, has this really been one single shot the entire time? And so that was their thing.
Wow.
Is each episode was one 45-minute long continuous shot, whether it was in multiple locations or in one location, and all the acting was done that way too. But talk about like the challenge of moving that mic around and staying out of the camera shot the whole time.
Yeah. And then the other thing I learned about that kind of situation, it's very much more about capture. Like in the studio, we're crafting a sound. Maybe we're trying to do something kind of artistic or interesting. And in those situations with video, is more about just clean capture that's going to be usable later on. And it's a dynamic situation. You're moving fast. You don't have time to do anything too complicated, and just clean capture was the deal.
Yeah, and then how often do you think that what we hear in a video or a film in the end is dubbed later anyway, versus used from a shot?
I don't have any.
And that's probably changed.
I would think so. And also changes in situations and the types of projects you're working on. I think the projects I was working on, most of it was the sound that was shot on location is probably what was used.
Right.
But I think it varies by type of project.
Is that the kind of gig where your arms get really tired?
Yes. Yeah. So,
because you're constantly holding a boom.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? So I'm a pretty tall person. It was an advantage to be tall because I didn't have to hold the boom quite as high as above me as I would have if I was a shorter person. But yeah, that was and you maybe learn kind of ways to hold the boom that might be a little less fatiguing. But I learned a lot doing that. I wouldn't consider myself an expert, and it's not what I really do anymore. Although it was interesting and a really cool skill set to kind of delve into.
I just never really had a chance to use shotguns much. I think I'd be fascinated by how they sound.
Yeah.
I was told once by David Blackmer that a shotgun has a very flat response.
I would not necessarily agree with that. Although I would...
Okay.
I don't say that categorically because David Blackmer knows a few things I don't know, I'm sure. So it might depend on the shotgun, but I think a shotgun mic has a very narrow pattern, and to get that pattern, they have to do some things that I think probably compromise the purity of the audio quality, just by necessity.
Yeah. Don't you remember seeing sessions in Nashville sometimes where they would put a shotgun over the drums pointing down at the snare?
I know if that happened. I don't
know
if I ever actually saw that, but I definitely know of that happening. And it's something I've never tried, but I've always been kind of curious about myself. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it once. I don't even remember hearing it. It's so funny how we'll be affected by things like that. Like, we saw it once. It might sound like shit. We have no idea, but we always want to try it.
It's something different from what we've done. And it's a really interesting idea, and it could be really cool. So makes sense. I know in my kit, I carried a shotgun mic, but I also carried a HyperCard mic for situations where I didn't absolutely need the shotgun because the HyperCard would sound better.
Right. Well, yeah. Didn't you you did classical stuff too, or that was the internship?
That was the internship.
But I mean, did you find yourself doing much of that later, or drawing back on the stuff you learned from classical?
I don't do a lot of classical stuff, although I did a session just a few months ago where I recorded a string section and a choir and some horns, and that was so much fun and fantastic.
You're like, how do we do that delta?
Yeah. So, but no, it was great. Just a great opportunity to use some of that.
Dreaming of a career in audio or the entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs where you'll learn on professional-grade gear with industry pros, learning through real projects, not just lectures. Explore studio production, live sound, audio for film, and a whole lot more. Or take the entertainment business program to learn about contracts, promotion, and more. With diploma, associate, and bachelor's programs, there's a path for you. Book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848.
And so I don't do a lot of that now. You should get Kevin Edlin on the show because he does a lot.
We've been working on it. We've been working.
He does a lot of that stuff. He'll have a lot of interesting things to say, I'm sure. But I use a lot of it. I think it profoundly affected the way I look at stereo miking. And I like overheads for a drum kit. Almost always use. I don't use space pair. Like most people who mic a drum kit overheads, they'll just put two condenser mics up, kind of spread out, space pair. And I almost never do that. I really like a stereo technique called ORTF, which is two microphones that are, I eyeball it, I don't measure it, but it's two microphones that are 17 centimeters apart and 110-degree splay. It provides but using a more formal stereo technique like that, I think provides a much more realistic image and more depth. And it makes you, when you're listening, it feels more like you're there in the room. And I mean, we learned about those things in school, but we really learned about them in the context of classical recording. And I use that all the time.
Yeah, I've done a lot of ORTF overheads on drums. I always really loved that sound. Do you know what ORTF stands for?
It's some kind of French organization, radio and telephone in France.
Oh, you think it's telephone or television?
I'm sure it's no, it's not telephone. It's not telephone. It's television. You're right.
Français. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. But and it makes sense. So it's if I recall correctly, it's two microphones that are pointing. They're near each other. Their butts are closer together than the mic.
The capsules are 17 centimeters apart, which is about 6.5.
Oh, 17 centimeter, which is probably
6.5 inches.
Meant to be the width of your head.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah, give or take. Yeah.
And I think 120 degrees.
110.
What I remember seeing.
Yeah.
110. Look at you go, man.
Well, just because, but also, like I said, I don't get out a measuring tape or anything when I'm setting it up. I just eyeball it. Yeah, and I might vary the display from 110 degrees just depending upon what I think might be appropriate for what I'm doing. So I don't.
Right. I mean, sometimes it makes sense to point it towards the cymbal more or something like that.
Yeah, I do that for sure.
Yeah, that's one of those things. Let's talk about miking up a drum kit a
All
little
right.
bit. What do you remember about stuff that you maybe still practice now or stuff that you learned? I remember Brad Jones once told me when I was at Alex the Great, he would talk about it almost it was a camera lens. It's like, does it see that part of the
That's
drum
cool.
kit?
Yeah.
And I thought that was a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah. Here's the thing for the rock stars. You think of a cardioid. So you think about what's the microphone pointing at, what's it seeing, which is a good thing to think about. But the other piece of that to keep in mind is like if you point a microphone, let's say, towards the center of the snare drum, that doesn't mean it's only hearing the center of the snare drum. It's still hearing this whole snare drum. It's hearing, so the microphone, even though it's a cardioid pattern and it hears more of what's right in front of it, it's still getting bleed from the sides and it's still getting information from all around. And so that is an incredibly valuable thing to know and think about because, especially miking up a drum kit, you've got a whole bunch of microphones and they're all hearing bleed from all the other sources and it's this big interactive kind of mess. And so it's just, you shouldn't think of the snare mic or like a tom mic as only picking up the tom. It's picking up everything. Mm-hmm. It's picking up more of the tom, but you should keep in mind how that all interacts and kind of work in that sort of a mindset. And one thing about a high quality microphone, generally speaking, is that the off-axis the off-axis frequency response is going to be more uniform. So if I'm talking in front of the mic and I move around to the side of the mic, a higher quality microphone, that sound impinging from the side is still going to sound good. It's not going to sound awkward and some weird frequency response. And so using good quality microphones in that sense, when you've got sound coming from all over, is going to make your bleed sound better and make the whole cohesive picture come together much better. I
think that's one of the problems that I run into with tom mics on a drum kit. So for example, the tom mic is often pointing down towards the tom, the head of the tom where you're going to hit the stick on it. And very often the back of the mic is rejecting a crash cymbal that's right there.
Yes, it is.
And you learn very quickly when you're getting into the mixing and stuff that like, here comes the tom fill, turn those toms up, sounds awesome. And then the downbeat happens. And I remember, the day I discovered, well, not literally the day, but remember discovering that I would listen to the mix and I'm like, those cymbals are just killing me, and I'm trying to figure out what I can do, and I'm muting the overheads, and it's not making a difference. And then, and then all of a sudden you mute the toms. And like, oh, that was it. And it's probably a combination of, the cymbals coming in at this weird off-axis, awful sound, and then also the fact that you're compressing everything and maybe adding brightness to the toms.
And the cymbals are just plain loud. Then they're right there.
And they're just
loud. Right there. Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about controlling cymbals on a session. Well, I think you've worked with a lot of bands that maybe you've worked with pro musicians in Nashville and know how to walk in and just session players, but you've also worked with bands that come in and maybe need a little bit more understanding in the studio, right?
Yeah, or just, people that, especially, here in Portland, I don't work with, there's a lot of really cool bands. One of the reasons I'm here is the music scene here is amazing and a lot of really interesting stuff and great musicians, but, they might not be, they haven't been doing studio sessions their whole lives all the time and that kind of thing. So I deal with, less than perfect situations, which is fine. It's great. Yeah. Still cool. Still really cool music, really fun. And I really enjoy it. But so to your question, I would say one of the things, first off, is mic selection. Like what tom mic are you going to use? Well, some of them are going to reject the cymbals from the back of the mic better than others. I did a tom mic shootout on an off day, maybe a year ago, maybe not quite that long ago. When I track, I work at a big studio called the Hallowed Halls. It's really cool. It's near here. And I go in there and set up tracking. So I went over there one day when there was nothing going on, and there was a couple. They have interns there, which back to the thing we were talking about, just having a peer group, or just having people around that are kind of into the same thing you're into. So there was a couple interns, and we were all hanging out, and let's do a tom mic shootout, and we set up a tom in the tracking room. We put a whole bunch of mics around it, and recorded it, and then listened back and compared the different microphones.
Did you put up a crash cymbal?
Absolutely did. Yeah, I put a crash cymbal over it. And so that's one of the things we listened for was, in addition to how does this mic sound on the tom, how does it sound with the cymbal? And definitely some of the mics picked up less of the cymbal than others. And that's something really valuable to know. So the first thing is, choose a mic that is going to maybe not pick up as much of the cymbals and that the cymbals that it does pick up will sound good, hopefully.
Yeah. What did you discover? And did you try anything really outlandish, like using a figure eight where the rejection side is pointed towards the cymbal and
I didn't try that, and that's a really good idea. I did not try that.
I haven't tried that yet.
Yeah.
I mean, we have people talking about stuff like that on the podcast.
Yeah. Figure eight.
It's hard to try everything. It's hard to try everything.
It absolutely is. Yeah. So I put up a bunch of mics that were just kind of standard, like this is a common tom mic, or this is something you would use. So I didn't set up anything that's like, this would never be used as a tom mic, but let's try it out. I didn't do much of that.
Yeah.
Figure eight is a really interesting pattern because a lot of figure eight mics have really good rejection from the sides. That's
right. Especially ribbons, I think. I think they're super rejection.
Yeah, but also other condensers, figure eight condensers, and that's the thing a useful thing to do. Another good tip is when I get a new mic or just a mic I want to check out, I'll put my cell phone on the table and I have a file and I have some test files in there. If iTunes was playing back random files, I'd be in trouble maybe because eventually it's going to play back a test tone or something. So I have pink noise in there. So I just have pink noise coming out of my speaker on my phone. I set the microphone up, I put on headphones, and I hold the mic in front of the phone and I just turn it around. And it's like, okay, here's pink noise from the front of the mic. Here's pink noise from the side of the mic. What's it sound like? And that's an interesting way to get to know a microphone and the characteristics of it.
That's a great idea. Great tip, man. So basically, it's like you would hear something that sounds like filtering, like
yeah.
Kind of stuff,
so
right?
some condenser mics that I've tried out. It's actually very impressive how much rejection there is, how much that noise goes away when I turn to the side. The null. It really is kind of null. It's pretty good a lot of times.
Yeah, and I guess ideally, you might try the experiment and think, "Wait, what the hell am I supposed to be hearing?" And probably the answer is ideally when you turn the rejection side of any of the mics, whether it's cardioid or hyper or figure eight, you should just simply hear no tonal shift in the phone pink noise. You should just hear it getting louder and quieter in volume.
If it was an ideal microphone, yeah. Probably none of them are ideal. But yeah. So, the interesting thing about the experiment or the exercise is to listen to that difference and get to know it and be like, oh, so that's this particular mic. When you turn it this way, it kind of shifts in this kind of direction. But some of them are smoother than others. Yeah, and so the idealized one would be totally the same sound as you turn it.
Any other, just use your phone tips for the studio like that?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I would set up for a drum micing on a session, I used to take the Casio keyboard.
Nice, that's awesome.
On the drum bench, and I just put the demo on, and then I could always hear if every mic was working.
Yeah, I do. I definitely do that with my cell phone. Like if I set up a few mics in the studio and I don't have an assistant, because if I have an assistant, then I have them go out and scratch the mics and we go through and check things. But oftentimes I'm working by myself. So you can. Very useful thing is to put the cell phone playing some music or whatever in the room or in front of the microphones, and then you can go back into the control room and just make sure you're getting signal. Make sure the line works. So that's super useful. Circling back really quick, another thing to think about with, we were talking about testing a microphone and listening to the pink noise as you turn it. I've never heard an Omni mic that sounds exactly the same all the way around. Some of them are really similar, but it's a useful exercise to do with an Omni mic and notice how the sound changes if the sound's coming from right in front of it versus from the side. It's definitely, it's more uniform than a cardioid would be, but they're all going to sound a little bit different as you turn the mic around. So something to know.
Yeah, and then of course, I've experimented with my voice on a mic, a vocal mic. You talk around
absolutely.
it. And then you can tell, you're like, oh, I can hear myself in the front of the mic, and we go to the back. I don't hear myself. But I had a funny learning experience once when I was checking my figure eight mic. I had gotten my U67 back from the shop, and I was testing it to hear the new capsule. And I put the figure eight on with headphones, and I talked into the front, and I was like, yeah, it sounds great. And I talked in the back, and it sounded all weird. I was like, wait a minute. What's going on? And then I realized, I just thought about it for a minute. I was about to report to him. And I realized, I was like, I'm just hearing the fact that the front is in phase with my voice in the headphones, and the back is out of phase with my voice in the headphones. So it sounds different to me.
Yeah.
But with your iPhone trick, they would sound the same.
Yeah, probably so. Yes. Yeah, so that is interesting. But, you said something that sparked an idea in my mind, and now it's gone. Oh, well. It'll come back. Here's another tip for the rock stars out there. That thing you talked about, that when you talking into the back of that figure eight mic, it sounds totally different because it's out of phase. A useful thing to try, and try it with your own voice and see how it works, is flipping the polarity on a mic pre for a vocal mic, because it is going to sound different to the singer, and you might find that it sounds more coherent either in phase or out of phase, and it's something you can try to check. And it doesn't make too much difference to the recorded sound, but it might make a big difference to the singer, how they're perceiving the sound as they're singing.
Right. Have you found there are times when they actually selected the out of phase version?
Yeah. Although I don't do that exercise as often as I should, probably.
Right. And then if you're, let's say, rock stars,
and especially just to jump, I'm sorry to cut you off. Another thing about that is, especially if your headphone situation has some latency in it,
right.
Like if we're going through any kind of digital system, Pro Tools or whatever, then the polarity check on the listening for the microphone is definitely something to check out.
Yeah, because the latency could be shifting the phase relationship anyway. Yeah. So, rockstars, if you're hearing that and thinking possibly like, well, I don't want to flip the polarity on it and record it that way, another easy trick would be to just use the plug-in. Just do a digital flip, record it in, correct, and then just digitally flip it so it's going back out to the headphones that way and see what people
you can do
think. That way you're still printing the in phase if you want.
Yeah.
I've had people, when you're learning that stuff and you're learning about phase correlations and you're learning about polarity, and then in most instances, it seems like people would say like, you can't hear the difference between absolute polarity. Like if you flip phase on something, you're not going to hear it by itself. And then I've heard people say that you will hear it. I think one place that you might hear it that makes sense when you think about it is like a kick drum. Like when the kick hits, is it moving the speaker out towards you first for impact and then back in? But then I've also heard people say that a vocal, even just a vocal mic, can sound like it's sitting forward more rather than backward. And I don't know if I've ever really heard that, but it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing. I'm a skeptic on the absolute phase question. I have worked with some engineers when I was younger coming up that I really respect who were absolute, like they were convinced that it really did matter and they were very careful about that. And I don't categorically know what the truth is. I don't feel like I do. So maybe they're right.
So they felt that absolute phase was important.
Yeah, especially like on a kick drum or something like that. And it may be.
Right.
I haven't made up my mind entirely about that.
Right. Well, rock stars, you got plenty of time to make up yours.
Yes.
Hey, rock stars, imagine sitting down at your DAW with 165 instruments and over 150,000 sounds to choose from. That's what Complete 15 from Native Instruments delivers, the most powerful creative tool in your studio. Inside, you'll find Contact 8, Massive X, Battery, and Guitar Rig 7 Pro, giving you everything you need to create in any genre. Plus, you'll get inspiring sampled instruments like upright bass and electric keys, along with endless expansions to keep your sound fresh. Whether you're producing hip-hop, scoring films, or creating EDM bangers, Complete 15 has you covered. Pair that with Native Instruments control keyboard and machine hardware, and you get next-level integration that makes music creation fast, fun, and seamless. Go to nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 for 10% off. Howdy, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is David Streit, joining us from Portland, Oregon, where they make great coffee and sometimes it rains. David, are you ready to jam?
I'm so ready to jam. Let's jam.
What is Portland like? How would you describe it as a place? I mean, of course, that's where Larry Crane has come from.
Yeah.
That's where Jackpot Studios is too, right?
Yep.
Tape-op.
Yep.
Birthplace of tape-op.
Yes. Fantastic music scene, great community, lots of nature, like if you're into hiking and going into the mountains and stuff like that, beautiful in that way. Really great. I like it a lot here. It's not coastal though, right? It's about a 2-hour...
A river confluence.
It's about a 2-hour drive to the coast. So not too far.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like, is it where the rivers come together? What is it?
Yeah, it's the Willamette and the Columbia rivers come together.
Yeah. Okay. Right on. And it's a little bit hilly and mountainy too?
A little bit. No? Yeah. The city itself is more flat, but you get west and it starts getting into hills, and you go east and there's mountains eventually. And
Right on.
Yeah. And it's overcast a lot, but that doesn't necessarily bother me. This time of year, it's often pretty beautiful.
Yeah. Okay. You were giving us some more studio tips.
Yeah.
I think,
and we were talking about Polarity. And there's a difference.
Polarity,
I
yeah.
still say flip the phase, although I still try to keep myself from doing that because it's polarity. Shout out to Dan Pfeiffer at MTSU for being a stickler about that.
Right.
But in a multi-miking situation like drum kit, it's important to check the polarity of your microphone's relative phase. So that's another thing is like, get your drum sounds going. And then, when you're listening to everything, or maybe I usually check against the overheads. I kind of use that as my sort of baseline.
Maybe give us a little, without stretching out too long, give us a breakdown and for somebody of like what do you do? What's a step-by-step to check the polarity on your drum mics?
Yeah, that's great. And to jump out a little more, so the polarity is, two microphones. Like say you have overheads on a drum kit and you also have a snare mic. Well, the interaction of the phase, the snare sound reaches the snare mic before it reaches the overheads. So there's a timing difference there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that creates a phase difference that might affect your frequency response of your sound. And so you can hit the polarity invert button, also called the phase button a lot of times on your mic pre or your console channel or whatever, or with a plugin in your computer. And
for those who don't know where that is yet, it might be a circle with a line through it.
Yes. And so you can invert the polarity of one of the signals, and you can just listen and see what sounds better, what sounds more coherent, and what sounds out of phase. And one of the telltale signs is if it's in phase, you'll usually get better bass response. And oftentimes, if it's out of phase, some of the bass frequencies will go away, so it'll sound a little bit thinner. And that's one of the things you can listen for.
And so what's interesting about that is often in studios, which don't necessarily have like super, super well-tuned, balanced rooms, you might hear a slightly different frequency relationship up in the mix position that somebody else does here back on the couch, for example, behind you.
Yeah.
And so I find that sometimes it's helpful to recruit all the ears in the control room and just say, do your thing, but when curious, say, hey, which one do we like better?
Mm-hmm. Better one, better two.
Because you're getting, because you could, because there are times I noticed that like the phase between two mics, the relationship might sound interesting to me in the mix position, but in the back of the room, it seems clear to them that the one seems to have a lower kick or something like that.
Right on. Yeah. So, and we'll take a brief digression, philosophy of overhead miking on a drum kit. So for me, I like to think of the overheads as a picture of the total drum kit, and that's how I use them. Some people use overheads more as like cymbal mics. And, both approaches are totally valid. It just depends what you want to do and what you're going for. But for me, I think of the overheads as I'm trying to get a picture of the whole kit. And so I use the overheads as sort of the thing that I check phase polarity against all the other mics because the overheads are definitely picking up the whole kit. And so everything is in the overheads. And as we said earlier, everything's in everything, really, because there's bleed. But so when I'm getting sounds on a drum kit, I start with the overheads. And that's kind of my baseline. I get that sound going, dialed in, and then I'll maybe I'll do the snare mic next. And I'll probably, initially, I'll just listen to only the snare mic and just make sure it sounds okay and doesn't seem to be any obvious problems, whatever, do that really quick, get the gain dialed in. But then I'll listen to the overheads and the snare mic together, and I'll flip the polarity on the snare mic, and I'll decide what sounds better. And then I keep going. So then maybe if I have a snare under mic, I do the same thing. And oftentimes, the standard wisdom is just always flip your polarity on the underneath mic. But that doesn't necessarily always sound the best. So it's better just to listen to it and try it out. And then I just go through all the things, and that's kind of my procedure.
So, but I think what's important though is to have a benchmark, right? So you have to, this one item like the overheads or the kick drum or something like that has to always stay the way it is. And you're checking everything else against that, and then also checking everything else against everything, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
When checking the polarity on the drum mics, it's important to make one of them the benchmark. It's like, leave this one alone, flip everything else against that, check everything else as a assembly against that one mic, the one source,
because it's relative phase. It's the phase of the snare mic relative to the overheads or relative to something else.
And if you start flipping everything all the time and flip your reference, then you just get confused. You don't know who you're flipping against.
Yes. Yeah. And that also comes into play. Sometimes I'll have a guitar player who has a stereo rig and they have two separate guitar amps. Like they have their pedal board and it splits out to both guitar amps and they're running kind of a stereo thing. And it's useful to check that phase too, because sometimes some guitar amps invert the signal, and you'll find that you get a much better sound if you flip the polarity on one of those amps, or one of the mics to one of the amps. So any kind of situation that's a multi-mic situation on one source, oftentimes it's worth checking.
Yeah. Have you ever had guitar amps and bass amps in the same room with the drums and found that even flipping those things against the drum mics makes a difference?
I've definitely had them in the same room. It's not something I do a lot, and I can't remember right now if I checked phase on that or not. I bet I did.
It would be, I guess it would depend on whether or not you were really hearing the guitars in the other mics or the, well, you probably wouldn't hear the drums in the guitar close mic.
That's not as much of an issue.
But yeah. And that's, a thing for us to remember, I think, is that these sort of relative things also have a lot to do with relative volumes. So for example, in my guitar booth, if I have two guitar amps in there and it's, two guitars tracking, I try to always go in and give a listen and make sure that both guitar amps are about the same volume.
Right on. Yeah.
So if somebody needs to turn up for their sound, then let's turn up the other amp too if we can. Because if you mix and match something that's just like having an acoustic guitar out next to the drum kit, it's never going to work very well because or an upright bass, that's a real
Can you turn that
culprit.
acoustic guitar up so it matches the level of the drums?
Right. And the drums bash into the acoustic mic so much, With two guitar amps in a space, it can do the same thing. Like one guitar, especially if you're panning them, you can hear the weird phase of it being picked up in the other mic. Yeah, sometimes that can sound cool. It can actually give you a widening effect on one of the guitars.
That's definitely something to consider. That's a good point.
Tell us about your studio, man. So you go over to Hallowed Halls to track, and then you come back to mix in your space.
Yeah.
What kind of tools do you like to surround yourself with? How do you like to work is it sort of a mix room? Can you overdub?
I do overdub. Yeah, I do overdubs as well, for sure. The priority thing, the way I set it up, most important thing is it's a mix room. It's set up hopefully for good sounding monitoring and that kind of thing. So I mix entirely in the box. I might occasionally send something out to process it through a guitar pedal or something like that, but I pretty much mix it in the box. So I really like control surfaces. Because maybe because I came up using faders on a console, I really like.
I think we see one right behind you in the video shot.
Yes,
too.
It's definitely right there.
Are those the what is
That's the Avid Artist Mix, which is the old version of the S1 that they have now.
Yeah,
I'm hanging on to it as long as I can because it does the same thing as the S1, and I'm hoping they're not going to somehow make it not work with Pro Tools, but that's probably coming eventually. But yeah, so I've got 24 faders. And it's really nice to just have not the whole mix, but at least 24 faders worth of a mix in front of me, and I can just kind of glance and see and just reach out and grab stuff. And I'm used to making, my entire career I've been making fader moves, so I kind of have a muscle memory of if my brain wants it so much louder, my fingers kind of know move the fader this much, and so it's very intuitive for me to use faders.
Well, another thing and a benefit of having the 24 fader artist mix is that you might only have to bank it once to get to the rest of the tracks.
Yeah.
And so it's one of two banks of faders, and so you can kind of automatically already know where your drum mics are.
Yeah.
Your drum faders.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm doing the SSL, a pair of the UF8s. And they work great, but I really have to bank back over to the drums, and I have to.
And I still have to
do much more leaping around.
Yeah, I still have to do. It's still a little bit of it brings me out of my intuitive space, and I have to think for a minute about how do I get to the drum faders again. But it's helpful to have more.
It's one of those things that I don't know if it always gets talked about, but it's yet another reason why a console, working on a console in the traditional way, can be so valuable is because. We take for granted, but I think we instinctively, we don't even think about it necessarily, but I think when I'm thinking about what's going on in the computer, I sort of construct this 3D world in my mind of the apps that are open and which one's where and where the cursor is and where it's selected to. And then you just, you don't necessarily think about it, but I think that's what's functioning in the back of my brain. And yet in the physical world too, with the console, that was doing that as well. There was you have a sense of where things are in space.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, it's one of the most fundamental things that we have in memory.
Yeah.
I mean, it's why when they do those memory championships and memory learning tricks. It's called the memory palace. That's why they use visual cues to help you remember things that would be otherwise hard to remember, like just words or numbers or anything like that.
Yeah, interesting.
Because we instinctively, our lizard brain knows how to get home in the dark.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
Yeah. I did, and as we mentioned briefly, I also do live sound, and I do quite a bit of mixing shows and things like that. And I'm more likely, I think in a live sound situation, I'm more likely to have fewer channels than I would in a mix. So oftentimes I don't have to bank around. And we're using digital consoles all the time in the live sound sphere. But oftentimes I don't have to bank around so much. Within the course of just mixing a set, I find myself not even having to think about where's the guitar channel fader. I just reach out and grab it when I want to adjust that. So it's what you're talking about. And that really is conducive to staying in the flow state and being able to mix in a more fluid kind of way. As you should, because in a live thing, you're not supposed to be looking down at the console. You're supposed to be looking up at the stage, as much as you can. See if the guitar player is about to solo, right? Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So you want to just have your hands grab the right thing and go for it. Yeah. So the more we can set up our studios that way, the better. What are some other items that you really like to have around you in your studio? Yeah. I see racks of gear because you can probably, for recording. Yeah. So you got your mixer. What about your monitors? I've got a pair of Mackie HR824. I actually just recently... The classics. Yeah, I recently got the Mark II. I used the Mark I for ages, but they were starting to age a little bit. And so I recently got the Mark IIs, but they're very similar. So I'm pretty used to those. I have a fairly dead control room. There's a lot of absorption in the control room, which seems to work fairly well for me. Did you used to work in not dead enough control rooms? I think so. It's hard to remember that far back. That detail that far back. When I was kind of setting up my place, I got some recording studio design books and kind of went through. And at the time, one of the things that impressed me was this idea of a neutral control room. That was fairly dead. And so I kind of went in that direction. If at some point, I'll probably move to a different space and I may rethink that. But yeah, it's a fairly dead space with the idea that... To that point, you don't have to get too into the weeds on it, but if you were to describe where treatments or where essentially sound panels, absorption panels go in the room to give it that neutral quality, how would you describe that to people? A lot of people are starting in sort of a rectangular box of a bedroom and converting it to a studio in a house or something. So, and if you're starting out, the very first thing to do is just treat the points of first reflection. And if you get online and start looking up acoustics, you'll find information about that really quickly. But it's the point where if you're sitting in the mixed position and you can get a friend to hold a mirror up on the wall, and any place where you can see the reflection of your speakers, that's a good place to put some acoustic treatment. That's where the sound comes from the speaker, hits the wall, and bounces straight to your ears. So that's a good place to put some absorption. And don't forget the ceiling, because it can bounce off the ceiling too. In my room, so I've got the walls beside me fairly well covered. The ceiling there's a big cloud overhead. Most of the ceiling has absorption on it. And then I've got behind the mixed position, there's some absorption. There's also some areas kind of behind into the corner behind to the sides that aren't really treated. So it's not a totally dead room. I've got a rug on the floor, so it's not, there's a wood floor, but there's a rug over it, so it's not too much bounce there. Yeah, so yes. Yeah, the rug is a great trick for just a boxy room. That will do a lot right off the bat. Yeah. And then the other thing I have is I have a custom-built desk that my fader surface is on, and I've tried to make that I've got a bunch of stuff on it, so it's not that small, but I've tried to make it as small as possible. And also it's just table legs underneath. It's not like a big cabinet or anything, just to minimize the acoustic footprint of the desk. And definitely I did the mirror trick on the surface too. So the surfaces are tilted a little bit so they don't reflect sound directly at me from the speakers. So that it sort of eliminates the first reflection in that direction as well. That's great. That's great. Mirror, mirror on the wall. Yes, he's the bounciest of them all. AC/DC would say, I've got the biggest bowls of them all. I just remembered that song. Yes. Look, when it comes to finishing your music, nothing compares to Isotope Ozone 12.
This is a complete mixing and mastering suite of tools with 20 pro modules to shape your sound. You'll find the new bass control for a tight, powerful low end, new unlimiter to restore life to overcompressed tracks, and new stem EQ so you can rebalance vocals and drums and bass without even opening the mix session. And when it's time to make your music loud, the IRC5 Maximizer gives you loud, clean mixes and masters that still sound open and clear. Save time with AI-powered workflows that keep you in the driver's seat. Ozone 12 takes the guesswork out, but you stay in control so your music translates everywhere, from streaming to stage. Go to iZotope.com and use the code ROCK10 for 10% off. Okay, cool. And then let's anything else you want to tell us about your space there? Like tools you like to use?
I have a separate room that's sort of an ISO booth. And I actually, before the pandemic, I used to have singers sing in the room with me just for that immediacy and communication. When the pandemic happened, I started putting the singers in another room separate from me because they're breathing a lot when they're singing. And I've just left that situation. So I have an ISO booth, and I put guitar cabinets in there. And what I really like to do is I'll put a guitar cabinet in there, but I'll have the guitar player sitting with their pedal board in the room right next to me. And so, the cabinet with the mic on it's remote, but we'll have the amp head and the pedal boards and stuff in the room with us. And then we're just sitting next to each other tracking, and the communication is so much better that way. So that's a really good thing that I like to do is a bass player or any instrument, a keyboard player where it's possible, have them in the room with you. And then, the talkback, you have to have a good talkback system, but if you don't have to use it, that's even better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, talkbacks, it's great to have a good system, but you're absolutely right. There's no substitute for just being right next to somebody.
Yeah.
It gets tricky with loud guitars sometimes. I'm always like grappling with how do I turn the speakers up so the guitar player feels like they're rocking out in the space, but I'm closer to the speakers, so I'm putting my earmuffs on.
So
so that I'm not blowing my head up the whole time.
I bought a monitor speaker, like a floor wedge you would use in live sound, and I put that in near where the guitar player will sit. And so sometimes if they need it really loud, I'll put some extra sound through, and it's still hitting me, but it's hitting them more. And so that's one of my strategies. So sometimes I'll give them their own monitor speaker. If they need just a lot of something, I'll put it through there and not put it through the studio monitors as much.
That's clever. Yeah, another thing that I'm thinking about the cabinet in the other room. So that's a great, this is a great rock trick when you're making records and you want the guitar player right there in the control room and you're listening on the speakers and you've got maybe you even got a variety of guitar heads that are running out to cabinets in the other room. But when people bring in combos, it could be a bit of a brain twister where you're like, well, you can't split the amp up. One of the tricks that I do sometimes is, a lot of combos you can actually turn it off before you do this, but you can disconnect the speaker on the back because they're just going into a jack on the top of the amp. And in those situations, you can still run those amps, a Fender, Princeton reverb or whatever can run out to a cabinet out in the other room. It'll be a different sound than the Fender, the Princeton reverb by itself, but it can still sound pretty great.
Yeah, I do that all the time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I basically treat the combo amp as if it's an amp head, and I just don't use the speaker and use the speaker extension jack or whatever to send it to the other room. The other thing that's really useful, you can get you don't really want to run a super long guitar chord, or you might, it'll make the sound, it'll take some high frequencies out of the sound, and that might be something you like, and that's a strategy, and that's cool. But generally, you don't want to run a super long guitar signal cable. So there's different companies that make devices meant to extend a guitar signal over long distance. I use the Little Labs, whatever it's called, SDI or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I have the PCP.
I've got one of those too, actually. That can be used for that purpose also. The PCP is great because you can use it it's great for taking one guitar signal and splitting it out to multiple amps if you want to have a situation where you're running a few amps at once.
Right.
And you can do all kinds, and it's good for reamping. The PCP is a great little device.
Yeah.
And Radial makes some devices. I'm sure there's some other companies too that are designed to take a guitar signal, convert it to something you can send over a balanced line, like with an XLR cable, And then on the other end, there's another device that converts it back to a guitar signal, and then you just plug that into the amp. And so if we have a combo amp and we want to use the speaker and everything in the combo amp, I'll put that in the ISO booth and I'll use one of those signal extenders, and that preserves the fidelity of the guitar signal over the long distance run. So that's really useful.
I think that's a great trick. I remember learning that the first time. You remember Brian Carter?
Oh, yeah.
Classmate, buddy from Murfreesboro. So we were at his studio where we had to go a long ways from maybe the control room to somewhere else. And we just used, he was like, oh, you just go into the DI and then use the XLR cable to run all the way out there. Yeah. Then have another DI in reverse and then go into the guitar amp. And I was like, that works great.
I've messed with that and I've had mixed results. And it probably depends on some of the particulars of the DI. So, but that's worth trying. Yeah.
Yeah. And in all honesty, I've had mixed results with every single strategy, including a guitar cable straight into the amp.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I think the good takeaway from that is always remember to trust your ears.
Yes.
Like when you're going to do, like, let's say you're going to set up this long run guitar cable thing as a trick to make it work. Don't forget, you can just take the whole damn thing out to the guitar amp. When you're doing setup, have a big fat coil of cable on the ground that's going to be this long run, plug a cable straight into the amp, listen to your guitar, see what it sounds like out of the amp, disconnect that, plug into this long run thing, plug that into the amp. You're still standing next to the amp. You might have to do it quickly so you remember what it sounded like, but then play through that. And if you'd be surprised, you might hear a difference pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
When you A/B like that, and then you can just decide if it's going to bother you or not going to bother you.
Yeah. The trust your ears thing is actually really important. We should emphasize that for a second. I know you're going to ask me at the end of the interview, what's the one thing? And that easily could be it.
Right.
But learn to trust your intuition and trust your ears. And when you're setting stuff up or when you're dialing in a sound, especially like you're starting to get the session going and you're, okay, hit the kick drum and you're dialing in the sound or the guitar or whatever. If something doesn't sound right, if something seems off, really pay attention to that and don't just gloss over it, because it might mean there's a bad cable or maybe you mispatched something and you're hearing the wrong microphone. Pay attention to that and kind of chase it down if you can, because that intuition.
Maybe the patch bay is just crusty and dirty. That'll affect the sound.
Yeah, there's all kinds of points
just
of potential failure
when you patch something in. If you're even working with a patch bay.
Or maybe your microphone or your mic pre has developed an issue or anything like that.
Right.
But pay attention to those things and chase that down. And in the long run, that's going to save you some grief and maybe save you some potential pitfalls or traps.
And always remember to look at all the tracks when they're all supposed to be in record. Make sure you look up and down on the screen to make sure that they're all in record.
Yes.
That'll burn you, like especially on the sessions where you have a full band mic'd up and you're going from song to song and stuff like that, and you take a break and you come back or you import and do a new session. It's very easy to accidentally in a Pro Tools session have, that one mic dropped out on the drums and we didn't really hear it. We didn't notice. We weren't focused on it.
And the inverse of that, especially back in the day when we were working on analog machines, make sure nothing's in record that's not supposed to be in record.
Right, big time, boy. Or vice versa. I did a session with Bobby Bear Jr., actually. Sorry, Bobby, and thanks for being gracious about it. But we were doing publishing demos, and we were recording up to lunch, and then we went to lunch, and I thought, for some reason, I thought I was being extra careful because the tape machine would have been, all the tracks would be armed in a tracking session. And I thought, if we're going to leave the studio and come back, I'll just disarm all the tracks real quick. And so I disarmed all the tracks, and then we went to lunch, and then I came back. And the way I got burned is the tape machine, we were in input while we were tracking because we weren't doing overdubs. So I could hear everybody, and we're like, great. And I just hit record, the record light on the MCI came on, and we're rolling along, and we get all the way through the first song after lunch, and we move on to the second song. And we're talking like, a couple takes, something like that. And the guy from the publishing company, somebody who was very nice, looks over and goes like, hey, aren't those lights supposed to be on? And I look over at the tape machine, and because I had disarmed the tracks, the remote said we were in record, but no tracks were actually in record. I was like, so I had to make that, game time call where I was like, well, we'll finish song 2 and I'll just bite my tongue. And then as soon as song 2 was over, I was like, I just walked right out And I walked right into the middle of the room with the band and I just said, "Hey guys, that sounded totally amazing. These are sounding great. Unfortunately, I have some bad news."
Yeah. Oh, that must have been the
And I
worst
told
feeling to have to go do that.
It was pretty bad, but it was a hell of a good learning moment,
Yeah.
and how to handle it too. Like,
Yeah.
don't derail the next song
Yeah.
talking about the one that didn't happen,
Yeah.
because they're out there, they don't know.
Yeah.
They're just having a ball. And the beauty was, in that moment, they just said, "Shit, well, shit happens, and let's just go ahead and let's just knock it out again." And everybody's like, "Cool." And they still had it. The song was still fresh on their
that's
mind, so
good.
they banged it out and they nailed
Great.
it. And it's one of those handful of instances where sometimes, this is a funny takeaway for me. If you have all the takes and then you're like, "Let's do another one," and everybody knows you've got the good one, then another one a lot of times just sucks, and it's like it wasn't worth doing the other one. I mean, not always.
No, because like you were talking
about
about earlier when we were talking about Pro Tools, sometimes a little pressure is a good thing. That
right. Well, it's like requesting another one when it's not needed. I think you can get a result that's like, it wasn't any good. Why did we do all this extra stuff? We had it on the first take or the second take. But requesting it, bringing it up when people actually have to fix it as a redo, I've noticed there are times where like people step up to the plate and they go for it. It's that pressure thing. It's like, this is game time. So, and they nailed it, and it was better than the first version that I lost.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, good. Dodge that bullet.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go on such a long tangent on that.
It's all good. And then, so also, if you can, take a minute to just listen back. Like, you recorded maybe a couple takes or that first take, listen back to it a little bit. Or you're getting sounds, record a little bit and listen back, And I do that anyway. Like, we'll get drum sounds, and then I'll tell the drummer just to play a groove, and I'll record some of it, and then I'll invite them to come into the control room and listen to the drum sounds. That, first of all, that gives me and the drummer an opportunity, and maybe whoever's producing or the rest of the band or whatever it is, an opportunity. If it's not exactly what they had in mind, they can say that, and we can make some adjustments. And also, hopefully the drums sound awesome, and then the drummer comes in and hears this awesome sounding drum, and they just get psyched, and that's great too.
Right.
Yeah, and it gives you a chance to listen back and make sure everything's working okay as well.
I know for myself, the times that I have played drums on something, I might go and listen to it and realize, I specifically remember realizing, I was riding the floor tom, but you don't even hear it. So I'm going to have to actually hit it harder, like when I ride the floor tom, so that it reads. And hopefully musicians come in and
and that's
hear where the adjustments should happen.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, like tracking a band or something like that, or maybe even doing overdubs. It's very useful to maybe do a couple takes, but then have everybody come into the control room and let's just listen down. Ostensibly you're listening to see if that was the take, but also it gives everybody a chance to kind of hear how everything's working together. And that thing, like, maybe I need to hit the floor tom a little harder, or whatever it is, or maybe we need to make an adjustment in how we're playing this section of the song, or those kind of things.
Yeah, big time for me as a guitar player too. Is I come in and I'm just like, why the hell did I play all this extra notes? Time to simplify it. So you did teaching. Maybe that's, I don't know if that feels too far back to ask stuff you remember learning from that. But, what do you feel like were some of the most common issues that students would have, or questions that people who are learning how to record might have that you found were helpful?
I am drawing a blank on that one, unfortunately. Maybe someone will come to me, but I don't. I don't remember.
Teaching is less current for you because
I don't remember that particular thing.
All right.
Just as a brief aside too, I still do some teaching. I do some private lessons now. I have some clients that have their home studios and they're learning to record. And I have a client who I helped, didn't really understand how patch bays work, just getting started. And so we did some sessions on, this is how to use a patch bay and this is what it can do for you. And then I also helped him design the layout of his patch bay and things like that.
That's great.
Yeah, or other students I've taught some mixing tips. I'll come to their place and we'll work on a song they're working on, and I'll give them some pointers, or how to mic a drum kit. I've done some stuff like that. So I still do some of that.
Yeah.
But as far as, it's hard for me to answer that question. I don't remember specifically.
No, that's all right. It's fun for me when I do that kind of coaching stuff too. I've done it, whether it's somebody in the studio. Having interns has always been groovy to teach, pass on knowledge. And then also even Zoom classes. In fact, rock stars, if you're looking for a class, or you need something you can reach out to David or myself, and we might be able to help you too.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you do a lot of stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I've done a variety of it. I often, I will hear from, not often, but I'll hear from somebody who requests it. And I usually find it's a lot of fun to just dive in and share all the knowledge.
That is one of the things, when I go to the Howard Halls and there's interns around, I really do enjoy that aspect of it. And I still remember what it was like when I was interning and then when I was assisting, and that opportunity to learn from somebody who'd done it a while is really great. And then the opportunity to kind of give back in the other direction, like to show some people some stuff is pretty fun.
Are you ready to launch your career in the audio or entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, right here in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs to prepare you for the industry. From studio production and live sound to audio for film and a whole lot more. You'll learn by doing, working with professional-grade gear alongside experienced industry pros. If you're more into the business side of entertainment, SAE's Entertainment Business Program teaches essential basics like contracts and promotion to help you navigate the industry. With diploma, associate, or bachelor's degrees, there's a path for everyone. Plus, Career Services supports graduates as they take the next step. Want to see it for yourself? Immerse yourself in Nashville's exciting music scene and book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. So you shared with me a playlist, and Rockstars, if you want to hear some of the stuff we talk about, David's work, you can just go in the show notes and click through and you can listen to these great records he's been doing. But 400 was one of them that I wrote down. It sounds great. Tell us about capturing that sound, like the cool drums. Do you remember these references from your playlist?
I do. That particular, I love that record. It was such a privilege to work with them on that. It was a while ago, but it's on the playlist because I think it's a great record. Largely, it was a great band, and they were amazing and cool to work with, and that whole thing. So capturing drums, I don't remember a lot of specifics. We did those sessions in the whole record we did in a few different studios, the different batches of sessions where we captured different songs. Some of that was done in that Neve room at Quad, actually, and a few other studios too. Certainly, my whole career, I think room miking has been a big part of my drum, at least if I have a decent sounding room, a big part of my drum capture. So I might use some artificial reverb on occasion, but oftentimes a lot of my room sound is a room mic from the session. I'm a big fan of that kind of thing. So that's part of it.
What are some room mic tricks that are more recent that you figured out over at Hallowed Halls?
Yeah. One of the things, so Hallowed Halls is a really big room and it's really live. And so I'll put some gobos, which anybody out there might not know. A gobo is just a portable, absorptive, could be reflective, but absorptive panel, basically, that you can position in the studio to change the studio acoustic. Yeah. So we have some big gobos. I'll put gobos around the drum kit to kind of deaden the sound a little bit. And it still sounds live, but it's a very live room. But one of the tricks is to...
Isn't it like an old library or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's big space, really cool. One of the things I'll do is I'll put room mics on the other side of the gobo. So it's a little bit more of an indirect sound. It's definitely a very roomy sound then. And so I capture some of that big room ambience, but with the gobos around the drums, I also have the option to have a tighter sound. So that's a good trick. This isn't specific to the Hallowed Halls, but another trick is, how many times have you, oftentimes we'll do a scratch vocal and maybe the whole band is in the room there. So you'll put maybe a 58 or something in front of or a SM7 or whatever, but 58 in front of the guitarist to capture that scratch vocal. And oftentimes the drums sound kind of cool in that mic. So sometimes I'll just set up a 58 in the room, maybe even with its back pointing towards the drum kit and to get that room sound. So that's kind of a cool trick.
Yeah. That was, Jamie Tate talked about a 58 as being a secret mic for the drums. He would have, how did he do it? He had a mic. It was a 58 in front of the drums looking out towards the room, and it was meant to be a talkback mic that was like really compressed.
Yeah.
And then it sounded so cool, he would incorporate that into his drum sound.
Yeah, cool.
Because the drums were in his space at the Ruckus room. He'd be in the control room looking through the glass. And then there's a big room there, and then the ISO booths are on the far end of the room. Looking towards the control room. And the drummer's back would be facing him in the control room up close to the glass of the window and like looking out into the big room where all the musicians would be. And the mic would be in front of the drums, just an SM58, I think, just pointed straight out towards the room.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so stuff like that's cool. I often will put up some kind of what we'll call like a GAC mic, like, or it could be called a blast mic sometimes or something like that. I'll put up some kind of mic that I'm going to put distortion on or heavy compression or something. And it's usually positioned somewhere so it picks up the whole kit. It might be in front of the kit, or it might be like in the what people call a knee mic position, like just over the kick drum, but somewhere where it's kind of picking up the whole kit and just really make a distorted or highly compressed or just rough sound, and then blend that in just a little bit underneath the whole drum mix, just to add some more depth and dimension and maybe some grunge to it. And that can be, I'm sure lots of people do that, but that's a pretty cool trick to do. You know, with the 400 record, one of the tricks was I had a killer drummer. The drummer in that band was just tight and amazing and fantastic.
Always makes such a difference.
It's such a difference, yeah.
Have you done sessions where you've had the same drums, same drum miking, same setup, and two different drummers sit down at the kit at different times?
I don't think I've done that. But
Bonnaroo was a great example of that for me,
I'm sure.
Because it was so many artists coming in.
I'm sure.
And you just quickly realize, you're like, oh my God, that's what it's all about. You know, it's the same acoustic guitar mic, you know, and two different people play them. One of them, you think, I'm the greatest engineer in the world. What a great sound. And then the next one, you're like, I'm terrible. I can't get this. I can't figure this out at all. Until you realize, oh, it's just the musician playing.
Yeah,
you know?
Tone is in the fingers, as they say. And which is also true for engineers. Tone is in the fingers. You know, you can have maybe me or you in the exact same studio with the exact same mics, dialing stuff in. It's going to sound different. And part of it might come down, especially if we're positioning the mics, like way we approach mic placement is going to be a huge difference. But also just the way we dial stuff in, how much gain we use, how much EQ, whatever, how we balance the mix. Like tone is in the fingers is true for engineers as well.
I forgot who told the story. If it was maybe about Al Schmidt or something, but somebody was telling the story about their mentor saying, listen to this. And he said the mix sounds great on the console, and he pulled all the faders down and he put them up in the exact same spot. They were like, that's the way he told the story. Like it was intentionally the exact same spot, and it was a different mix.
Wow. And so
and that was the lesson.
Yeah.
In other words, it's almost like there's the combination of the fingers and knowing where to do it, but there's also that each moment is just simply different, you know? And I understand with digital, we pull up, you can pull up a mix and export it and null it, and you know it's the same mix. But in that analog world, it was like even the same wasn't the same.
Yeah, interesting.
Which is interesting to hear.
I really like the idea of a mix as a moment in time, as a capture, like a classic record from the 70s or something. Like, this is a tangent for sure, but I'm not as interested in hearing somebody do a remix of that, because I feel like the mix was part of the artistic expression that was capturing that moment in time.
Yeah. You know what I just remembered?
What's that?
Dude, when you were here in Nashville, you came over and we did a session together.
We did.
Yeah, man. You came over when we were doing our poetry score session.
Yeah.
I think it was
that was really fun.
Helping the Thunder session.
That was really fun to hang
out
on that.
Man, it's so much fun doing that. I love having my friends over for that. So thanks for coming over and
thanks
doing
for
that.
having me. Yeah, that was a good hang.
Yeah. So let's see. So the Absinthe Quintet.
Yeah.
Another record in your collection. What have you learned about recording a bluegrass acoustic ensemble?
Oh, gosh, that's such a broad question.
Well, how's it different from other sessions? What do let's say somebody's like, we got a bluegrass band coming in today. Yeah. What might be the first question you need to ask?
Yeah, I mean, so those guys were kind of electric bluegrass. So they weren't like pure acoustic bluegrass. So that's a little different.
Okay. Well, that's fine.
And that might be the first question. That
right?
might be the first question. Is like, and maybe I don't ask it outright as a question, but like, what's the instrumentation? What are you guys trying to sound like? Is it going to be a kind of thing where I've done some other kind of bluegrass-y sessions, acoustic-y sessions, where the idea was to have everybody in the room playing together, and we kind of had a mic in the center of the room, but I had individual mics on instruments as well, but it was still kind of musicians in a circle all playing together, and
more of a traditional bluegrass.
Yeah. Versus like Absinthe Quintet was a little more like, okay, we're going to do the tracking bit now, and some of the some of the instruments were direct or through amplifiers or whatever, and there was a drum kit and all that kind of stuff, and then we're going to do some overdubs. It's such a broad question. in my mind, I'm sure there are differences and generalities, but in my mind, it comes down to like every project's a little bit different depending upon the particulars. As a generalization in bluegrass, you're probably going oftentimes for a little bit more of a natural sound. You want the instruments to sound like if you were standing in the room in front of that instrument, what it sounds like oftentimes.
Yeah.
Versus maybe some rock music where that's maybe not quite the case.
Right.
So, thinking about mic techniques and high quality microphones that are going to really give you a good capture of this acoustic sound or something like that.
I know some people have talked about rejection being important. So, for example, when you've got musicians in a circle, the musician that's right in front of the mic, there might be another one over to the side that you don't want to bleed in. So figure eights can be sometimes useful to kind of reject a little bit of who's over to your left or right.
Yeah, and positioning the whole ensemble and the microphones in a relative way to take advantage of the polar pattern and the pickup characteristics of the microphones you're using for sure. So like you're talking about using the null of a figure eight to your advantage in that respect. And also going back to like miking up a drum kit, but also an ensemble, especially an acoustic ensemble in a room, you're not going to get rid of all of the bleed. And so doing things in such a way that the bleed doesn't hurt you. And maybe it helps you. Like for me, in a drum kit, a good drum sound, part of the good drum sound is the bleed, is the, it all kind of works together to kind of gel everything together, ideally. Positioning things to either minimize bleed or at least, and another thing is sometimes if you're in a situation like that, you want to go ahead and have the musicians kind of close together as opposed to spacing them apart really far, because if you have people spaced apart pretty far, it's decrease the volume of the bleed to some degree, but you're still going to get some bleed and there's going to be more of a time delay. And so sometimes it's better to actually have things a little closer together.
It'll sound more like a reverb, more like a room mic on the, especially if you got a banjo in there. It's like, do you want a room mic on the banjo or do you want the other one to just pick it up so that it just sort of sounds a little wider? And another thing I think that's helpful is to think about, okay, well, which instruments, they might be in a circle, but I've got two speakers. So some of these instruments are going to be in the middle, some of them are going to be on the left or the right.
Yeah.
So how do I want to position everybody so that one instrument cross talks to the mic on the other side and maybe just sounds more spacious?
Yeah.
With the bleed or something like that.
And that brings up a really good point too. In one of those kind of situations, especially maybe if you're using some room mics or something like that, it's sometimes helpful to try to position the musicians in the room in a way that might mirror the way you're planning on positioning them in the stereo field in the mix and panning them. So there's some coherency. So like in the room mic, if the banjo is coming off from the left, then, that's great if you're going to pan the banjo to the left in the mix as well. Although, like you said, it could also be a situation where you want to, if it's maybe a less present sound, having a little banjo in the right too, to give it kind of a sense of roominess, or so that might be cool too.
Yeah, when the Punch Brothers came into Bonnaroo, I learned a lot from people at Bonnaroo because some people would come in and just say, this is what we do, so set the mics up this way, which was great because, you have this opportunity to learn new ways of doing it. And then you never let that bruise your ego on a session because what they're doing is they're giving you a gift of a new technique that you can just steal from that moment forward.
It really is a gift. And like you were talking about earlier, when the musician says, this is what worked for me before, that's a gift. If they tell you, if you put the mic right here, it's going to sound good, that's a gift. And you still have to evaluate it with your own ears, but
So the Punch Brothers, I think once they came in and they just had a pair of, it's sort of like the ORTF thing, and they would assemble themselves around it a little bit. Because they knew how to step forward a little.
That's a beautiful thing.
But then I think another time they came and they had that for the sides, but they also had like maybe a Neumann in the middle where he was singing on it. So the lead vocal might want that centered microphone, and then everybody else is in the sides. And I guess a mid-side could possibly work in a situation like that, although I haven't really tried that to test it out. Cool stuff. Transporter.
Yeah.
More beautiful sounding acoustic guitars and mandolins.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite ways to record acoustics and mandolins? And tell us about that session.
Yeah, that was a really fun group to work with. There was a core group, but they also brought in some studio musicians who were really good, and it was a really fun session. So acoustic guitar, broadly speaking, two approaches that I might take to acoustic guitar. I might mic it in mono, or I might mic it in stereo. And it might depend upon the arrangement of the song. So in a situation where acoustic guitar is going to be like the main instrument, like maybe it's a singer-songwriter kind of thing, there's an acoustic guitar and a voice and maybe a few other things, then I want the acoustic guitar to take up more space in the mix, and I'm probably going to mic it in stereo. And versus if I have an acoustic guitar that's just part of a rock track that has a bunch of stuff going on, I probably don't necessarily want to take up a lot of real estate in the mix with it, and maybe I'll just mic it in stereo and I'm going to pan it off to one side somewhere or something like that, and it's more of a one piece of the big puzzle. So that's one thing.
Right, yeah. The stereo acoustic I find really helpful. Like you said, when it's just acoustic and a voice, then the acoustic could be a little bit wider and the voice is in the center of it. And so the acoustic is kind of hugging the vocal or something.
Yeah,
as opposed to if it's mono, it's right up the middle with the vocal, and then it's like it's competing. You only can make it louder or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And also, if it's mono, it feels very one-dimensional. You want something to kind of fill up that space,
right? Relative
to what you were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the reverb can sometimes give you that sense of space again in stereo.
Yeah.
Still. Okay, cool. And then do you find that your ORTF miking works well for getting the stereo acoustic, or do you find that the space pair is a little more appropriate for that?
I often actually use another stereo technique called XY, which is the two capsules at 90 degrees, but the capsules are as close together as they possibly can be.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I use that for if I'm really up close to something like an acoustic guitar or something like that. Because usually acoustic, I'm miking a fairly close distance. I mean, I might throw a room mic in the room as well, but oftentimes I like XY. I don't use space pair a lot, but I do sometimes. One thing with an acoustic guitar, generally you don't want to put the mic right in front of the sound hole because it gets really boomy right there.
Right.
The classic thing that I use all the time is mic in front of the 12th fret, but just kind of point it over towards the sound hole. I see people do that all the time.
Yeah.
That works really well.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Let's talk about the XY setup then too, because I think one of the obstacles to us doing the stereo mic techniques sometimes is the simple fact of like, it's awkward to set them up sometimes.
Yeah.
So what have you learned about
good stereo mic
making XY and stereo mic stuff not awkward so that you choose to use it more often?
A good stereo mic bar is great. So you can put the mics on one, not having to use two mic stands, and kind of that positioning can get kind of involved and awkward. So a good stereo mic bar. Shure makes one that I really like. I think it's called an A27M, but it's a tube so if you can, people who are watching, imagine this is a tube and it has a mic clip coming off at an angle and another mic clip coming off at another angle, and you can loosen it and you can rotate the two mic clips so you can kind of change the angle.
Right.
And are you looking that up right now?
No, I just wrote it down. I'm always writing down notes. But I can look it up while you're chatting.
No,
but I know that one of the challenges, so like sometimes a stereo bar is just this piece of metal that, with two clips coming up. And those can work pretty great for your ORTF or your XY, but mostly they seem to work great if it's a pencil mic.
Yes.
And sometimes you want to record the acoustic with more of a large diaphragm.
Yeah.
And so then are there tricks for that, or is that an instance where it's like, you're just going to need two mic stands for
It
that?
might be more in the direction of two mic stands. Although I like pencil mics, small diaphragm condensers a lot. And I use them a lot. In the past couple of years, we all go through phases, I think. So I've been getting more into large diaphragm mics for stuff. And I use current thing is I use large diaphragm tube condensers for overheads in an ORTF pattern. But in that case, the mics are kind of parallel to the ground. So I still use a stereo bar, but so the mics, like the stereo bar's here and the mics are hanging off of the stereo bar here. So the stereo bar works really well for that.
So instead of the mic, normally you set up a mic where the bottom is on the bottom
Yes.
and the mic capsule is on the top. So you're saying in this case, you would turn it 90 degrees so that it's sort of like a sideways miking.
Yeah.
And then that way you can just have two mics meeting in the middle.
And
the stereo bar will allow that as well?
Well, I'm doing ORTF, so the mics are just sitting parallel to each other, side by side, just pointing straight out, basically. And the stereo bar, it's super easy with a stereo bar in that situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Large diaphragms can be a little more awkward to position.
Can you do an XY where you just simply bring them as close together as possible? But I guess even then, the capsules are going to be a couple of inches away from each other.
And maybe not with a stereo bar, or maybe with a stereo bar in a different orientation. What you would probably want to do with large diaphragm condensers, if you're trying to do XY, is have them kind of nose to nose pointing at each other and then just rotate it a little bit. So if you had a long stereo bar, you could hang it off the stereo bar and do that with it.
Yeah. Do they make a really long stereo bar?
They do.
That'll mount
So
condensers.
AEA makes a ribbon mic called Nuvo N. I always get the two confused, but I think it's the N8 that's the black one, not the silver one, and it's meant for farther away. It's not meant for close-up recording as much. But they ship that with a stereo bar because they design it, or part of the idea is that you can use it in a bloom line configuration, which is similar to XY, where you're trying to get the two capsules right next to each other. So they make a stereo bar that's long. Bumped my mic. They make a stereo bar that's long enough that you can put them end to end like that on the stereo bar, and it works great.
Okay, dig it. All right, let me see what else I might want to ask you before we wind down here. I did have a line here that said, "Thanks for sitting in on our poetry score session, David." What about Blood and Bones? Kelly Koval recorded, mixed, mastered.
That was a cool session.
Something you mentioned. Tell us about that session.
Yeah, so that was, it was another situation where it was a live recording, everybody in the same room, and we didn't even use headphones. And she contacted me. She wanted to do this recording in her living room, just have all the musicians set up there and record this song. And so I brought my mobile rig over there and we put mics on stuff and did a multi-track and then took it away and mixed it later. But that was a super cool session. They were well balanced in the room. So,
So no overdubs.
No overdubs.
Did you do live to 2-track or did you do multi-track?
I did multi-track, yeah, for sure. And then
have you had a chance to do live to 2-track like that?
I do some of that, yeah, on occasion. I definitely prefer the safety net of the multi-track, but it can be cool.
Yeah, well, it can be. I'll tell you, because I've talked about this on the show. This is one of the things I learned doing a little bit of this with my own band early on, and then Bonnaroo, was if you can do an all analog live mix to 2-track, like nothing can beat that sound. It's the purest sound I've ever come across.
I've not really done much of that. I completely believe you, but I've not really done much of that.
Yeah, and I don't remember if I've tried it where it's like do the live 2-track and then sneak in the multi-track, to boost the level slightly. You'd have to have the phase would have to be perfect on that, but it's well worth trying, Rockstars. If you have a chance to do even on a Mackie console, it's worth setting something up and just recording all the mics in and just balancing it out and
it could be
letting everybody perform it well.
I had a session I did maybe last year where it was just like they didn't have budget to do a mix down later, and they just wanted to do it live to 2-track, and it can be really fun and exciting, and you have to allow that you get what you get, and you have to be okay with maybe it's not going to be quite as perfect if you were able to do a multi-track.
Maybe it's not maybe we don't have to be prepared for that. Maybe the artist has to be prepared for that.
Yes.
They have to like the sound of their own performance enough to do it that way.
So there's a certain amount of managing expectations and having everybody kind of know what it's going to be and understand what they're getting.
Yeah, but I do think it's important to remember that there's also there's still some flexibility because you can still do more than one take and you can edit takes together like a classical recording would.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
In fact, that's a great example of that, a classical recording. I mean, you can, with your classical ones, did you do live analog mixing like that, or did you often multi-track all the mics and then remix them later?
When I was doing classical stuff at Aspen Music Festival, which was such a good learning experience, we did live to 2-track. We recorded DAT tape all the time, so there was no multi-track.
Right.
And that's what it was. It was also part of the beauty of that experience was the philosophy of more minimal miking. So we had large orchestras, but we weren't individually miking everything. It was mostly like a main pair and maybe a secondary pair and then some spot mics or some mics on sections. So it wasn't like, where we had 100 channels or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, we were just doing a live mix right there at the moment. And that was it.
Well, that was one of the big Al Schmidt takeaways that I heard secondhand was that he would, use Omni mics all over the stage to spot mic and everything because of what you talked about earlier, where everything blends together well and there's no off-axis weirdness between things. You can just sort of turn things up or down.
Yeah.
And I think that would work. It'd be interesting to do that for, the acoustic ensemble in a circle, all those kind of use cases. So let's jump to a closing question here.
Okay.
This is the hypothetical one I love to ask all our guests on the show. You knew it was coming, David. You could take the Wayback Studio machine, and I always try and say, like, what's going to be different? In your case, I don't think your hair would go back in your head because you had long hair when I knew you then too. So it's not like that happened.
I think my hair was a little less gray. Maybe that would be the difference.
Maybe that's it. Maybe the color would just like come back in. Same with mine. And you'd go back in time and you find your young self and you say, listen, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you love to go back and give yourself if you could?
Yeah. There's probably a lot of things I could think of. I think one thing is to approach what we're doing as engineers, or even as producers, or even as musicians, but approach it as from a place of service. So in what we're doing, I like to seek to serve the song, serve the artist, serve the musicians, and that might mean thinking about what's right for the song. Really just thinking about that as your guiding thing. It also might mean paying attention. This was especially important when I was an assistant, but it's still important now. Like paying attention and noticing if the musician seems uncomfortable, maybe their headphone mix is off, or maybe something's not working quite right, or just or maybe they need a sharp pencil, or just paying attention to those things and really trying to facilitate. I had a musician come up to me recently that I hadn't worked with in a while, but I just ran into him at a show. And he came up to me.
And did you yell at him? You're like, get back in the tracking, get out of the control room. No, it wasn't like that.
No, it wasn't like that. But he came up to me and he was just gushing. And he said, he basically, I can't remember exactly what he said, but basically wanting to thank me for the work I'd done with him in past, situations. And the thing he mentioned several times was just he felt the care that I felt towards musicians and towards making sure that they were comfortable and making sure their needs were met. And just he said over and over again that what really struck him was the care with which I treated them in the music. And so I think that's really something to strive for, and it's going to make things better in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great, man. And it helps if you do care about the music.
It does.
Which often we do, and that's why we got into this, right?
Absolutely.
So don't lose sight of it.
And even if you don't, sometimes you're going to be working on a session where you don't really like the music that much, or it's not that exciting to you, whatever.
What? That never happens.
Yeah. So something to look forward to. No, but even in those situations, for me, it's still such a joy to be working with, interesting, fun people, and we're making music together. And maybe I don't love the music, but maybe the guitar player is just awesome, or maybe the drums are just tuned in and they sound so good, or those kind of things. And you can find aspects to get into. And if nothing else, I remember that in most cases, especially working with bands, this is really important to them. This is like their dream, and they're in the studio, and this is, it's really, they're making their record, and maybe it's the first record, or they're not going to make that many records in their career. And this is their dream, and I get to help them realize their dream, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, indeed. To that point, is there a style of music that you would love to work on? Is there something, I don't know if I ever knew what your favorite stuff was. Is there a way you can describe what's sort of favorite?
Yeah, I love doing indie rock music. I do a fair amount of that. I love doing that.
You like guitars and bands?
I love guitars. I love electric guitars. I will always love electric guitar and drums and all that stuff. I wish I did more acoustic jazz than I do. That I really enjoy. There was a period in my life when I mixed a lot of acoustic jazz live. I still get to go down and work for the Monterey Jazz Festival every year, which is really cool.
Wow.
But I would love to be recording more acoustic jazz. I do like, I told you I got to do a string section, and that's such a beautiful sound and so satisfying to, get that rich, lush sound and hear that coming through the control room speakers when you've mic'd it up. And so I enjoy doing stuff like that. It's nice to have a variety of things, different things on different days to keep it interesting. I had a roommate back at MTSU. This was was just an offhand remark. We were talking, what kind of music do you like? And he said to me, I like good music, and that's such a revelatory sort of insight that in any genre, it can be more about good quality musicianship and maybe a good song. And it's not genre specific in that way.
Right, exactly. When a good musicianship happens,
Yeah.
You hear it.
Yeah.
Which might be the same thing you were talking about, like this overall style of a session might not be your cup of tea, but something about the way the drummer put that drum sound together really hits you right, or whatever, you know. You said well-tuned drums,
Yeah.
So those are forms of that great craftsmanship.
Yes.
Well, Dave, it's great to hang with you, man. It's great to have you here.
What a pleasure, Lidge.
Thank you for joining us, man. Good to see you again when you were in Nashville, too.
Yeah.
Rockstars, thank you so much for hanging with us and watching another episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss any more from us, and drop a comment in too and tell us what you thought, because that really helps the channel out and helps these videos reach more people on the old YouTube. David, let the Rockstars know, where can they find you online? What if they want to come check out your work, or they're coming through Portland, they want to make a record?
Yeah.
How should the Rockstars
the best thing is just
learn more about you?
Just go to my website. It's just www.davidstreit.com. Streit is spelled Streit, so davidstreit.com. There's some examples of my work. If you scroll down, there's a contact form, and you can send me an email and reach out that way. You can also follow me on social media. At the bottom of the website, you can click on the Instagram or the Facebook links and find me that way. But if you want to contact me, the best is probably email me through the website.
Yeah, your website looks great.
Thank you.
As well dialed in.
Oh, right on. Thank you.
Maybe we'll talk about that next time.
All right.
Dude, thanks for hanging with us. And again, Rockstars, thanks for watching. And I will look forward to seeing you around the studio again.
Thanks so much, Lidge.
All right, cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our fantastic sponsors who help make this episode possible: Isotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, SAE Institute, Spectra 1964, and Picker. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com for any plugin purchase. Don't forget, you can start mixing right now with my free course, Mix Master Bundle. You'll find the link in the show notes below. And if you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors also in those links in the show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They are going to help you make your best record ever. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this, it's a great way to help support the show, and I really appreciate it, and I thank you as well. I'd also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Jeffrey Simmons, and Max Young. Thank you so much for watching and listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.